My name is Deb Cruz, and I'm president of JUUstice Washington, and I'm also coming from the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship. I'd like to welcome you all to the panel presentation tonight as part of the 2020 Northwest Justice Summit for JUUstice Washington. All who come in the spirit of goodwill are welcome here. I'm going to read the land acknowledgement that we use here in Whatcom County in Washington State when we open up any gatherings. We acknowledge the land, the territory of the Lummi and Nooksack peoples. Their presence is imbued in these mountains, valleys, waterways, and shorelines. May we nurture our relationship with our Coast Salish neighbors and the shared responsibilities to their homelands where we all reside today. While we continue with the introductions, if you would please take a moment to write in the chat box your name, your congregation, or whatever organization you are with, the city and state that you're coming from, and if you know upon whose Indigenous territory it is that you reside. Now, if you don't have a land acknowledgement for the area in which you live, I might suggest that you put this first on your things to do list. It may take a little bit of research for some of you to find out who those peoples are, but it is one way to acknowledge and honor the tribes and nations who were there before us and will likely be the foundation of your work in the future. I would also like to take a moment to recognize and honor any other Indigenous. Are there any other Indigenous leaders or elders in the audience? If you would please hail in the chat box so we can acknowledge you. And okay, Tex, if you're monitoring, if there's somebody who shows up, let me know so that we can honor them. For those of you not familiar with who JUUstice Washington is, we are the Unitarian Universalist State Action Network for Washington networking, collaborating to address a myriad of social and environmental justice issues. However, the Washington part of that is a little bit of a misnomer because our work and our connections take us well beyond the state of Washington, and particularly with the FAIN group, which is the First American Indian Nations Solidarity Group. Our reach and our connections go across the US and internationally in some respects. And this is particularly true in our work with Jewell James and his totem pole journeys when he goes across country and into Canada, and also regionally in our work with the tribal canoe journey that's held every year. So those are two examples of where our reach is at. We also do not work exclusively within our own faith, but we readily greet and encourage alliances and partnerships with all faith and wisdom traditions, other environmental groups, other social justice groups, and anybody else who we can join forces with to collaborate. For more information, you can check us out at justwa.org, and that's JUUSTWA.org. And you can check out some of the stuff that we get involved with on our website. We have an extensive, what we call FAIN, which is our First American Indian Nations Solidarity subsite that has a lot of information on it. I'm going to introduce our panelists here very shortly, but I would like to acknowledge a couple of other people that we've got sitting in the room with us, and I'm going to give them a minute to introduce themselves. And that's Freddie Lane.
Hello, everybody. Siamanis Jalacha, Sohila Quinasanat Tacho, T Kaya, Siamanis Jalacha, Okada. It is true, my heart's glad to be here with each and every one of you. My Christian name is Freddie Lane, Indian name Salkada, freshman council member of the Lummi Nation, and just really honored to be here. Thank you to all the organizers and engineers and everybody that brought us here virtually. Our hands are raised, ACM. Thank you, Deb.
Christine Myers.
Halito, my name's Christine Myers. I'm mostly work as a census outreach and education coordinator, contracted with the Cowlitz Indian tribe. I'm a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm just glad to be here and assisting with the Q&A for this lovely panel. Thank you.
Okay, Larkin.
Hi, I'm Larkin Flora. I'm coming from Bainbridge Island, Washington, Suquamish Territory. And I am an intern for Justice Washington, and I'm really pleased to be here.
And Sahar.
Hello, I'm Sahar Mohsin Loftman, and I am a Star King Divinity student and also an intern at Just Wa, and I'm in Germany.
Okay, so I'd like to say a special hi to Julian. I know you're out there somewhere, Julian Matthews. He's, let's say, a colleague of Elliot Moffett, one of our speakers tonight, working with Nimiipuu. Did I say that right?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. Some basic housekeeping items for this event. We have all the panelists' videos are on. The rest of you should have your videos and your mics off. And that is predominantly because mics are very disruptive when there's a lot of background coming in and will make a huge distraction when the panelists are speaking. Also, turning your video off helps to prevent the decrease of our bandwidth so that we don't do a lot of freezing or crashing. And should we crash for some reason, the Zoom will make an attempt to reconnect you. If not, you can come back in on your link. So have that handy. We are recording this and we will be making it available at a later date for all of you to review it. And we will also have transcripts, written transcripts available a little later on down the line. And that's for helping with facilitating us getting to the second part of this summit, which is going to be held in December. Closed captioning is down at the bottom of your screen. You can turn that on or hide the subtitles. If you want to toggle between seeing everybody and just the speaker view, that's in your upper right-hand corner. And should we have time for breakout rooms later in the evening, a lot of that is going to hinge on the question and answer period, how long that runs. You will be able to turn your video on and your mic back on while you're in the breakout room. Each of our panelists is going to have about 20 minutes to make a presentation to the issues that they are concerned about and they would like to engage us in supporting. And that will be all just in supporting what the tribes and the nations and the communities are doing, or making suggestions and recommendations on how to educate and inform ourselves on and transform ourselves so that we can get to doing this work. Tonight is our first American Indian Nations panel. Tomorrow we're going to have several other panels on racial justice, environmental justice, legislative advocacy, and our RIMS group, which is the Refugee, Immigrant, and Migrant Solidarity panels. There are a lot of issues that intersect with First Nations. There's a lot of intersection between First Nations and climate and other environmental justice issues. There are issues with the RIMS group, which is the immigrant, because a lot of the immigrants coming in, especially coming in from the border, are Indigenous people. So, and racial justice has always been an issue. So if you don't hear what you want to hear from this group tonight, you can always check in and see what's going on with the other panels tomorrow. The summit is set up in two different parts. Tonight is going to be the panels where we're going to where we're having people talk about the issues that they want, the things that are happening, the things that need to take place. Then after the elections, And depending upon the results of the elections, the first week in December, we're going to call everybody back, and panelists are welcome to come back and join us at that time. But sit down and do some actual strategizing and planning actions so that we can start getting some work done. We've got a tremendous mess on our hands, and it kind of doesn't matter who becomes president at this point. We've got a lot of work ahead of us to do, and we really need to get hot on getting it done. Now, other texts, have I forgotten anything? Any other announcements?
The guidelines are for gathering, but they're listed in the chat as well.
Okay, cool, thank you. Okay, so on tonight's panel, we have with us tonight Jewell James of Lummi Nation, Deborah Parker of Tulalip Tribes, JoDe Goudy of Yakama Nation, and Elliot Moffett of Nez Perce. Each has been asked to speak to those issues they feel are important to focus on in the days ahead, and where we might be able to lend our hands and voices in support of their efforts, or where we need to turn inward to educate, inform, and transform ourselves, like I said before, so that we can move on to the business of restoring some sense of sanity and get us back on track to building a more equitable and honoring future for all of us in the earth on which we live. I'm going to let the panelists pretty much introduce themselves. So in the order we have it is Deborah Parker will be first, and she's here, and Jewell James, Elliot Moffett, and JoDe Goudy. And again, once all of them are finished speaking, we'll go into a Q&A session. At this point, we have 50 people. So what I would like you to do is, as the panelists are talking, is in your chat box, put your question and address it to either Christine, Freddie, or either one of the tech Q&A people that you see there at the top of the participants list. And they will take and review those questions, compile all those together, and then send the questions off to, or ask the questions of the panelists. Deborah, so you go ahead, my dear, and I really appreciate you coming in and taking us on, and let's go.
All right. Well, first of all, teak-wheat seed in our Sahobsh language, it means thank you, teak-wheat seed. Thank you for sharing this moment with all of us, for setting up this platform. My traditional name is Sitsailtsa, Deborah Parker, and I'm here on the Tulalip Reservation during this COVID time, which is kind of scary for a lot of us who are watching all the transitioning happening, especially from our homes, and feeling that sometimes that loneliness, and then sometimes that peace. And so tonight we have, tomorrow we have a funeral service of a loved one, and it just kind of sets many of us in that space of looking at where we've been, and looking at who our elders are, and what the meaning of our elders, our Indigenous elders, are to us. I'm a member of the Tulalip tribes, and so we lost one of our Tulalip elders, and it really is that time of reflection, I think universal reflection. So thinking of our loved one who has passed, it's time that we honor their lives. And I think in this time of COVID, of people staying home and choosing to be safe, it's our own personal time to look at our life from the past, and maybe wonder what our future will be like. So I'm glad we're looking at the turning point, because if we don't turn towards something that's better in our lives, then we will continue the hurt and pain that really does not need to continue. It's that time. It's that time that we look inside and think about what really matters to us. For many of us, we go to work, we work those long hours, we come home, we try and forget about those things that hurt us deeply, or that have taken over our minds, that hurt, maybe a loss of a loved one, or a divorce or depression, all those things that encompass our being, we try and keep putting aside. And for us as Native people, that's why we have ceremonies. We have sacred ceremonies, and it's important we attend those ceremonies to take care of our body, our mind, our spirit, and then we can continue to do the work. But if you're like me, and I'm gonna be telling on myself here, if you're like me, you keep going, and through funerals, through losses, through grief, you just wake up and you keep going because we're taught to do that. And for many of us, we don't take that time to sit with someone and to share our hurt, to share our pain, and to share our grief. And as an Indigenous person, we've learned that there's intergenerational trauma that we don't even know about. There's within our DNA that hurt and pain that it surrounds us. We don't often know how to pick that up and sit with it and hold it and heal through it. And so I think that that's the hurt of our nation, is that we haven't picked up that pain. We haven't picked up that peace that has hurt us, whatever that may be: racism, sexism, discrimination, that deep grief. Maybe it's child abuse, maybe it's neglect. Those are tough issues for us to deal with. They're tough issues to look at. And when we do, it feels like, are we taking on the hurt and the pain? Are we are we going to break down? And I think this world needs more friendships, more folks just to sit and break bread, share a meal, have those conversations. We look at, well, where's the professional? We need those counselors or psychiatrists, and yeah, those are good tools. There's tools all around us to help us, but I think what we need is some good-hearted people, some folks to hold that space for each and every one of us to find that our healing. And truly, if you look at America, slavery, the killing, mass murder, and destruction of Indigenous nations, we have a lot of pain. We are carrying it collectively. And if we don't heal from that, as we've been told, we will continue to do the same thing. We'll continue to hurt others. We'll continue to hurt ourselves. We'll continue to hurt the land. We'll continue to do these things that are unhealthy for us to do. And so that's been my reflection. That's been having to pick up pieces myself and listen to my children who've said, hey, Mom, you worked a lot of hours. You weren't here, and now you're here. I don't know how to handle this. And so we're learning to be together in our home again and really look at what life is about, really look at what balance is. And so for us as Indigenous peoples, we look at the entire circle. We look at the teachings of our ancestors, and we pray that we're honoring them, but we also want to honor the future generations. So that's a huge responsibility that I don't think we talk about enough. And so our spiritual wellness is critically important. And in fact, we're losing a lot of our, not only our elders, our wisdom keepers, but we're losing our youth as well. They're coming here ready for that medicine, ready for the good words, ready for a piece of that healing in our culture. And sadly, for many of us, we've got to fight to bring that back, to fight to bring our language back, fight to bring our rights back, our basic human rights to clean water, to fish in our waters, to greet the morning, and with these current systems set up, running to school and not being with our children, we have this mass disconnect. And if during this time we're not connecting to one another, then if we're not connecting to ourselves, I'm afraid we'll continue on this path of hurt and of sorrow. And I hate to come at the opening in such a dark place, because really it feels like it, but it really isn't. It really is a freeing. It really is holding on to that that piece of us that needs to be held on to, acknowledging it, freeing it, healing it, and creating a space where we can come back together with one another. And so that's kind of where I'm at on my own personal journey, but also I see others who are wanting that time, wanting that space, wanting human interaction that's not, doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to, if you do, that's great. But we just want that basic human compassion. And that's something I think we've been lacking, and it's something that we need. And, you know, how do we get back to that? I think it's healing ourselves, healing the wounds that have been created through, for us as Indigenous people, healing the wounds that have happened to us from the boarding school, from parenting, you know, from trying to find out who we are as, you know, whether you're Stahovish, whether you're Lummi, whether you're Cowichan, whether you're Yakama, wherever you come from. It's that time to acknowledge ourselves, but also for others as partners to listen, just to listen. You don't have to become the expert in Indigenous studies or Indigenous peoples. No, I don't think anyone's the expert. You don't have to be the best. We've always been told to be the best. Yes, you can be your best, but allow us to sit with you and allow that space to listen and to acknowledge that we're human beings and that we're here together to create hopefully better ways of life. And these systems that we have, I mean, I was equity director for the Marysville School District, and I can tell you that we have a lot of work to do. And many people have taken their kids out of the school districts because they're failing systems. Many of them aren't functioning to the levels that we could be. And I think it's just, we've got to stop the madness, stop recreating things that don't do us well, and start to create new systems of being, new systems of health and wellness and connection. And yeah, so I that's right from my heart to you. That's the words I wanted to share. And so, Deb, I will turn it back to you, and I just say that thank you for the space, thank you for this time, and I hope that we can work together to find some improved humanity, some just gentle care and gentle ways of being.
Excellent. Thank you, Deborah. Big hug to you virtually.
Yeah, I know my little guy here. I'm trying to hide in my bedroom in the back so I have the space, so he's coming in with his big old blanket.
That's okay. Let him snuggle up to you.
I know. I love
That'll
it.
be fine.
That's the new change, you know, that I see a lot of people connecting with their kids.
Yeah.
And a lot of, even I'll just share this, very personal, but my therapist said he's leaving, he's quitting his job, and he's going back to be with his kids.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. You inspired me. And I said, hey, wait. Come back.
Don't abandon me, not now.
If we all spend time with our kids, we may not need a therapist. Kids are good therapy.
Well, unless you've been with them 24/7.
Right. Well, I walk out the door.
Got that going on with my grandkids, and I'm just going, oh my.
Right? You have to relearn.
Yep.
It's a lot of relearning.
Wait a minute, I've been through this before. Once, twice. It's like,
yeah.
I don't want to go through junior high again. Thank you. Anyway, Jewell. Thank you, Deborah. Really appreciate it. We'll get some questions for you a little bit later on.
Okay.
So go ahead, Jewell.
Well, I want to thank my sister, Debbie, for explaining her point of life at this moment. I love you, sister. And pray for you. And I'm so happy that you're with your kids. You know, the pandemic has caused us to sit back and reflect upon a lot of things. Yeah, for me, it's a little difficult because I'm in a process of renegotiating my relationship with the Lummi Nation. The pandemic provided an opportunity for some people that were in opposition to our pro-environmental positions, and they were pro-industry, and they wiped out our office. So, out of the 4 of us that worked in our office, 3 are gone. I'll be transferred over to another one, and hopefully the Lummi Nation and the leaders and the staff will be able to access some of the stuff that I've researched and studied, learned and listened to, and have to share in regards to Lummi tradition, culture, social, economic development over the decades. Yeah, I've worked with elimination for 43 years. My main focus has been sovereignty, treaty rights, environmental protection, and Native American religious freedom. You know, and over the years, I've been able to travel locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. And, you know, I mean, for example, I have a daughter from the Amazon. We adopted her. Her uncle was an activist over in the United Nations. And we adopted her and brought her to the United States, and she got educated here. Now she has a master's, you know, and, you know, so, you know, it's pretty good for a Makwashe Indian girl out of the Amazon River. We're just proud of her. But, you know, over the years, I've really maintained a commitment to try to protect the environment for our people. When we think about the campaign we did 3 years ago on the Anthropocene totem pole that we brought to Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and went up into New Jersey and DC and Florida. It's been traveling around, organized by Becca and her mate Jason. And they've done a great job. That Anthropocene, you know, it's basically a new term that talks about the death of the earth, the death of the environment around us. And for Native Americans, we've entered a treaty with the United States, and at the time, it was inconceivable. It's not really, I mean, wasn't part of our culture to think that somebody would come behind you and wipe out everything. You know, so I was, you know, I think about the campaigns that we've been told to look at, like the whale. You know, the whales dependent on Chinook salmon. Chinook salmon are being driven into extinction. And you know, you see in the paper or you see in the media and on the news, people arguing over whether or not they should kill off the seals and the walruses because they're eating Chinook. See, that's a reflection of how sick we became, how sick our society has become. We want to take that food right out of the animal's mouth because it might be the last one and we want it. It's ours. You know, I mean, that's the type of mentality that's behind that Anthropocene concept. You know, I always tell people herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, mold inhibitors, taste enhancers, color enhancers, and preservatives are in your food. And then almost every, you walk into a new building or sit in a new car and it's got that new smell. You say, oh, it smells brand new. That's not, that's formaldehyde. You know, that's the plastic you're smelling. Your house is full of synthetic glues and lacquers and plastics, and all that is carcinogenic. You know, forced air heating systems, forced air cooling systems. You know, if you're asthmatic, it creates a pause ion charge. You know, and when we look at the world around us, we realize that pollution's become a part of life. You know, we just accept it as part of life. And it becomes frustrating because we'd like to believe that if we work hard, if we work diligently, if we are really committed, we can make a better future for our children. And yet we haven't even figured out a solution on how we're going to become not contributors to the pollutions. You know, I mean, it's not a simple thing. I mean, we have to get deep down, real deep down into the subconscious and start making changes somehow. And it has to be done on a large social scale. I know I was talking, we've read in the books, we've all heard it. At the time of contact, you could walk across the salmon's back on any stream or river and get to the other side and not even be wet. That's how thick the salmon were. I was talking to the late Auntie Sarah, you know, and I was thinking about a fish company called Carlisle back 100 years ago. And I asked her back in the late 70s, I said, Auntie, did you work at Carlisle Packing Company? And she was a pretty old elder then. And she goes, oh, yes, Sonny, I did. I said, what was it like? She goes, oh, we worked, cut scow loads and scow loads and scow loads every shift. 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week throughout the whole season. And we only cut off the bellies. I said, what? She goes, well, you had a razor and you just cut the bellies off. I said, why? She goes, because you the bellies would lay flat and you just cut them in strips, roll them up and drop them in the can. And the rest was all thrown away. So like 80% of the salmon is thrown away and 20% was put in the can. You know, and these fish packing companies, they just marketed millions and millions and millions of 1 pound cans and larger, just mass exporting them. You know, and she said at the end of the shift, any scow load that was left was dumped into Bellingham Bay. I said, why? So that they could begin with fresh salmon. It's sad to think that that type of legacy is not something we don't teach, you know, and we don't share. Doesn't matter who did it. The fact is that if our children don't know the history of their ancestors, red, black, white, or yellow, or blue, then they're bound to repeat the same mistakes. We have to learn from the past in order to develop the plans for a better future. You know, and we all know that our brother tribes like Yakama and others that have been suffered major impacts due to the dams. You know, they still dream of the day when the dams will be gone and the salmon will be back. You know, and our relatives down there at Awa, when they took out that dam, that was a great accomplishment. You know, and the salmon came back. You know, so in regards to these campaigns that we have waged in the past, it's all about trying to get people to understand that we have to work together as a collective. You have to create that bigger social awareness, you know, and that means the churches, the environmental groups, citizens organizations, students associations, Indian tribes, whatever group you belong to, that if you have any type of conscience and commitment to improving life and the environment, then you need to work together. Tell the truth, I think about the Republican Party and I go, my God, any of the politicians now. You know, I've been spending a lot of time reading some of these books about prophecy and the churches and the battles all the way from the fundamentalists to the liberals and trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. Seems like we really are at the end of times, you know. I mean, seems like they just lost it. Maybe they're aware of something we don't know, that, you know, that it's okay to look the other way and not give a damn, you know, and not stand up for good positive morals or ethics, or to commit to a better future for the children. You know, and I kind of feel that society is really losing it. It is tough for people that are environmentally minded, you know, and it's tough for the students that may be looking to get involved somehow, you know, and I think groups like this, you know, people like Deborah, give them permission. You know, those young people need to have permission. You know, they think in their mind, you know, somebody's going to have to tell me, can I do this? You know, I'm afraid to protest. I'm afraid to get out there on the street. You know, they got to have permission. I remember one elder, when I was just a young person, I just got on the council, I was 26. And I was kind of just sitting there and listening to the crowd. And that elder, she came up to behind me. She goes, "What's wrong with you, young fella?" Are you afraid to share good words with your people? She goes, I give you permission if that's what you need. If you need permission, I give you permission. And if anybody has a problem with that, you tell them to come see me. And of course, she was a really powerful person in the community, and nobody's going to argue with her publicly, at least, And so, but I felt empowered, and it gave me permission to stand up wherever I went, to speak out. It does make a difference. I took that to heart, and I shared a lot of words wherever I've gone, but I always reflect upon that elder. Gave me permission to stand up, to speak my mind, and I reflect upon what's good for the people. We'd like to see the Salish Sea protected, and we don't want it to be like the East Coast and everything's just weighed to waste and contaminated. It'd be nice if we could have faith in the state, and it would be nice to have faith in the tribes, and all the organizations and churches here in the Pacific Northwest that could work together in order to develop some type of plan that would bring the salmon back, but bring them back to what? The rivers are being dewatered, the forests are being clear cut. My grandfather, I was riding with him one day, and he goes, right here, grandson. He goes, when I was a young man, the drop off of Bellingham Bay was right here. It was another 3/4 of a mile out where the silt has filled. Halfway across Bellingham Bay, 100,000 truckloads of silt came out of the mountains every year from the clear cutting of the forest. And it just filled half of Bellingham Bay. For the current generation, because they don't know that history, they don't know that it was Bellingham Bay is filled up. To them, it's always been like that. And that's part of the problem of we must not know better because we don't share our history with our youth and the generations coming behind us. A real reflection on how the changes took place and how the impacts came to be. And that's a serious challenge that we have to have within ourselves and amongst each other. If a student or a child can ask you the question, you should, and you are obligated to give them the greatest answer you can, even if it makes you look foolish yourself. And that's our duty, is to come up with the truths that so that we can confront the conditions of the environment and begin to honestly work towards an improvement. The Indian tribes that have fought for the past 130 years now, we've been suing the state of Washington and the United States and trying to protect the rivers and the salmon. We're also spending a lot of time suing each other over the last salmon in the river, the last salmon in the bay, the last crab, the last shrimp. The fact is that there's hardly nothing left. It was half of that and half of that and half of that. You keep folding that piece of paper, and pretty soon it's down to a little teeny corner of a massive sheet that once was. And then they're telling us, well, that little teeny piece of corner, you still have to share 50-50. And the court said that the non-native fleet should have been off the water. There's nothing left. The state authorizes the fleet. It's their obligation. And the treaty guaranteed that we would be able to make a moderate living. But the only thing that happens is that more and more fishermen have to leave because there's no fish left. There's no opportunity. And so our tribal fishers are disappearing. And the hard-nosed fishers are staying, operating under the belief that they can make a living, but they're not. Because of the limited resources and because nobody else is cutting back off the coastal fisheries, the oceanic fisheries, because of the prior interceptions from Alaska, Oregon, California, not just Washington, that most of the salmon are gone, what's left. There's not much left, but most of it's taken before we see it come into the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And then we battle each other over them, between us and the non-Indian fleet, and then between us and other tribes. And when the real question was, how are we going to increase the population of salmon so that we can still have our traditional ceremonial subsistence fisheries at least, and feed the salmon, the whales, and other life that's dependent on them. I remember back in 1979 when I was a young fisheries director, and I had to make a choice about battling the state of Washington and all the tribes and forced them to quit harvesting the herring. But the fact was that the herring, if we continued at the rate that we're harvesting, we would have depleted it within a few short years. And, you know, I mean, a lot of people hated me over it, but, you know, it became our Lummi campaign. Stop. Even if it hurts us, we have to stop. And, you know, the species still hasn't rebounded, you know, but that's part of the self-awareness and commitment that we have to make in regards to preservation of the species. You know, and we have problems with the United States in regards to the Endangered Species Act and other Clean Water Act. And, you know, there's a lot of federal laws that should be applied, but, you know, they weren't written for the native tribes. Most of our battle is trying to get Indian tribes into the law and with some power to make a decision, a binding choice, you know, and put some teeth into it. And so we have a sovereign relationship, government to government. You know, it's a treaty established relationship, and we should be able to operate as sovereigns and work together to develop a greater plan on how to preserve the quality of life within the Puget Sound, the San Juan Islands, the Walsh, as they call it. Thinking like what Deborah was saying in regards to, you know, a lot of the children, a lot of the people don't know they've been hurt. Well, it's the same thing in regards to those people out there fishing. They don't know how much they've been deprived, how much of what should have been in their net has been intercepted off by foreign fleets. You know, it goes all the way back to Reagan. You know, Reagan was negotiating a West Coast sockeye salmon treaty and an East Coast bottom fishery treaty. And he traded our rights off in order to get a better deal for the East Coast fishery. You know, and then all Canada and the United States had to do was crack down on their Indians. So Canada and the United States started cracking down on people in the Columbia River, citing people in the Puget Sound areas and fishing out near the border and up into the Fraser. And so they cracked down on their natives. They were teaching us a lesson, exercising their might. But it's those background, behind the scene negotiations that really is not open and honest and good faith negotiations, you know, in regards to representing the interests of Native peoples. That's why we fought so hard for the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. You know, good, honest, full faith and credit. We wanted to be able to reestablish who we are as a people and where we're from here in the Pacific Northwest. You know, and just like when the churches issued the apology back in 1987 and 97 and 2007, but they didn't do it in 2017. But the thing is that it's easy to say it in words. It's hard to commit to action. You know, and I would like to have seen some action where they're working harder and more dedicated to assisting the tribes get their voices heard in the halls of the legislative offices of Washington State as well as Washington, D.C., you know, because population-wise, we're a minority. You know, that's why the United States likes to think of us as minorities. You know, but in reality, we're indigenous and we're separate and we're protected by treaties and inherent sovereignty. But still, it's a long-term battle to change the laws of the United States so that they're favorable to the Indian nations and give us some type of say to stop further erosion or destruction of the waters. You know, so let's keep the Pacific Northwest beautiful and let's rebuild it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jewell. I appreciate you taking the time out to be with us and keep telling us the same message over and over again and reminding us that we aren't doing nearly as much as we need to be doing. Appreciate it. Thank you. Elliot Moffett.
Yes, thank you. My name is Elliot Moffett. My Nimiipuu name is Etpalatkit. Nimiipuu is what we call ourselves. We were given the name Perce, but Nimiipuu is what we go by. My mom and dad are Walt and Bernice Moffett, and my dad's parents were Sarah and Harry Moffett, and my mother's parents were Delia and Joe Williams. And I'm calling from the Nez Perce Indian Reservation in Kamiah, Idaho. And I'm right next to the Heart of the Monster, we call it. And that's where the Nez Perce came from, was the Heart of the Monster. I'd like to thank you for this invitation here tonight. And I'm very impressed by the other speakers. They have a lot to offer, and I think the possibility for many things to change. Change seems to be the only constant that we have. Right now, it's very smoky yet here in Idaho, and we're getting smoke from, we believe, Oregon, and maybe even California, which are still burning with wildfires. And this is just another reminder of global warming and climate change that we have to contend with as a people, as a community. And how we're going to do that as a people and as a community has not yet been determined, because, as was pointed out, we're not getting together with others to come to any type of agreement. I'm the president of Nimiipuu Protecting the Environment, a nonprofit 501c3 organization. And we got our start from what we call the mega loads issue, and that was about 2013. There was a shipment of gargantuan equipment being transported through the Nez Perce Reservation as well as other places. And they're called mega loads because they're huge. They take up 2 lanes of a highway. And they were trying to get through our reservation and go up the Lochsaw River. The Nez Perce did a rolling blockade of those megaloads. And when you were talking, Deb, about the organization, the Unitarian is saying how even though you're in Washington, that you reach out to other places and other communities. That's the way we felt too. We felt the connections, and we believe that that's from our old teachings as well, as that we're all connected, and there's interconnections in Mother Earth that we have to follow. And so we felt connections with because those megaloads were not targeted for our reservation. This was not their destination, but we knew that they were headed for the tar sands of Canada. And so on that basis, we opposed their transportation through our reservation. And then we opposed them because they were traveling through our reservation, our territory, without consulting with us. And our tribal council took them to court and other environmental organizations. And so we won on that. We won on that count. As a 501c3 organization, I also have to give our usual proviso that I don't represent the Nez Perce tribe. They have a tribal council and public affairs officers that represent the Nez Perce tribe. But I'm a member of the Nez Perce tribe, and uh, members of my family were treaty signatories in 1855 and 1863. Julian Matthews is the treasurer of our organization. So we got started with the megaloads issue. Then we started expanding from there. And right now we've been involved since then with trying to get the 4 lower Snake River dams removed or breached. And that's for the saving of the river and of the salmon steelhead also. And every year we've had a flotilla, we call it, and the flotilla where we would try to raise public awareness about the harm that the dams do to not only salmon but the river communities. And we've been very successful. We had to cancel this year's because of COVID-19. Looking to have another something like this, some virtual types of educational summits, environmental summits. But that's one of the reasons why we got together was it's part of our mission to help educate people about these types of issues that come along with the dam because of like the economics of it. And this is part of the Columbia River federal hydro projects. For the last 25 years, there's been about $17 billion spent on trying to recover the salmon and steelhead. And still 13 species are endangered under the Endangered Species Act. So it is our opinion that going on the same type of route is not a good idea. The status quo is unacceptable. And there was recently a record of decision, it's called, under the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, which said their best alternative, the feds have said, is to spill more water in the springtime to flush smolts downriver. And it's already in place. That's being done as we speak and has been done in the past years. So it's not going to work. Doing the same thing hasn't worked. So we've been advocating for a different approach. We want the dams breached. We've been trying to amass the political will to do that. And it's been very difficult, and with the COVID going on, and the Trump administration has been opposed to advancing environmental protections. There have been reversals of previous administrations' environmental rules and regulations. We object to that, and we have to object to that formally and in comments. But we also work with other environmental groups and other tribes and advocating for common sense, more protections for our environment, for our Mother Earth. We believe that there's sacredness in Mother Earth, and those entities have rights to live and exist. And so we had advocated and sponsored a motion to our general council of the Nez Perce tribe to recognize the Snake River with rights. And that resolution was passed by the general council and went on to the Nez Perce tribe committee, our tribal council, for implementation. And so we're working now with a tribal council to further develop that policy of recognizing the Snake River has rights. In this type of political environment that we recognize that there has been change. For an example, the mascot issue. Now it's the professional Washington football team. And so that's a good thing, because words have meaning and they have consequences. We object to the use of even the term tribalism in a pejorative, negative connotation that it's been used by the public media and other public figures when they refer to someone in a negative connotation as too tribalistic. Because as we know, we're members. The Nez Perce tribe is a member of a lot of intertribal organizations. And that is one of the strengths of those organizations, is that on different subjects, we come together with other tribes and work together for the benefit of the tribes and our communities. So we just want to make sure that we see positive things going on. This is a positive aspect of our current condition, to be able to meet other people and listen to how they're handling this situation is very valuable. But we need to do more. I hope everyone is registered to vote and will vote on November 3rd. If you haven't, by mail. The Nimiipuu Protecting the Environment, we stand in solidarity and unity with Indigenous communities and those who would recognize the importance of acting. we work with other organizations to help educate people about the issues surrounding the breaching of the 4 lower snake dams, like the hydropower. It's claimed that hydropower is clean, carbon-free energy. But what we have found and what's shown by science is that the reservoirs that are created by impoundments of these rivers in the global warming, climate change age are cesspools of death for our fish. Salmon and steelhead and trout we're like them. We like clean, cold, running water, and that's where we thrive the best in. And so we can see the connection between the salmon and our people, the Nez Perce, that we could be doing better and we should be doing better as a citizen, and how we interact with our Mother Earth and the beings of Mother Earth. We're looking for all kinds of avenues and venues to advocate for our interest, and we believe the interest of Indigenous people. And so we conduct environmental summits that help to communicate with other communities. We had representatives from Bears Ears come and talk to our communities. We stay in contact with other organizations like the Orca folks. But this is one thing that is common with us as well. We have a lot of areas that are really good habitat for fishing, for fishery spawning, but they're underutilized because the fish are not coming back. I'm very appreciative of the tribe in its species recovery programs. They've helped to recover the gray wolf, coho salmon. There's other species that they're working to help restore those species. One of the ones that I'd like to point out is the grizzly bear. We have country that could be habitat for grizzly bears, but even we cannot advance that because they're just like the orcas. There's no salmon to support that kind of population. That's kind of what we've been up to. We believe that there's positive signs that we're even going to get through the COVID, because we're all participating in social distancing like this, and we wear our masks and we wash our hands, and we'll continue to help with the health of our people. We want to start with such issues as food sovereignty, where our traditional foods are more utilized by our people, because we believe that's a route to healthy population. So even though COVID is really bad, and unfortunately, on my wife's side, we had to bury an elder recently due to COVID. We want to make sure that we protect the rest of us. And I just wanted to thank everyone for their participation this evening. If there's any questions, I'll be open for questions.
Thank you, Elliot, very much. Appreciate you taking the time and talking to us about a number of things that are going on and for the Nez Perce. So, JoDe, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Deb. First of all, Nichlawit, Ininaimo, Wanakshash Chaikwach, Anakudri Cook, Nayakusha Nakpanetashwapatat with. My name is Chaikwach. My name that I'm otherwise known as is JoDe Goudy. I'm coming to you from White Swan, Washington, which is located within the Yakama territories. I want to greatly appreciate the opportunity to share this evening with each of the respective fellow panelists, which I think did an excellent job, the three of them, and I'm honored to be able to sit with them in a discussion, and also with all of you. I think that if there's something I wanted to kind of contribute into the discussion, and currently I've founded an organization, a company, and a website called redthought.org. That's what I currently do. And we work on similar issues, trying to bring advocacy and awareness to a number of issues out there. But previously, in the end of last year, I ended a tenure as a Yakama Nation Tribal Councilman. I was 8 years on the Tribal Council, served 6 years as the Tribal Council Chairman for the Yakama Nation, and that was what I did before what I'm currently doing now. in my younger years, I served in a number of capacities, all of which I think have contributed to the totality of my young life experience. And I kind of take all those experiences together to try to do the best I can to incorporate some kind of positive will into that of the collective. And so, but one thing that I think is the foundation of it all, that I think is the most important, is our ways of life as Yakama, as Native people, our followings, our ceremonies, our language, and the things that have been incorporated and brought into me throughout my young life, and doing my best as a young person to carry and follow our ways of life, our teachings, our ceremonies, obviously is the greatest portion that is my foundation as a person. So, but now that I've kind of got that introduction aside, if there was something I wanted to contribute specific to the overall panel, each of them I think contributed some very significant things in their sharings, and but I'm known to be an advocate of something that I believe encompasses every one of the aspects of the discussions, and what was shared by the previous panelists, and also the organization that's hosting this event I know is aware of, and that is the doctrine of Christian discovery. And the doctrine of Christian discovery is for those who don't know and maybe are brand new to it, although I can appreciate there's a number of you that probably are aware of it. It is something that was inherited by the United States throughout its origin, and many things that happened throughout time, but it encompasses the largest practical piece of something that exists, that is framing the context of reality. And that reality encompasses everything that the previous panelists spoke of, and so much more. And I think the way to try to explain that is that the doctrine of Christian discovery essentially had its origins in the 15th, 16th century, and it was materialized by the issuance of papal documents, papal bulls out of the Roman Catholic Church during those time periods, that essentially holy marching orders, decrees that were issued to monarchies, Spain, Portugal, England, among others. And what those papal bulls essentially brought out in their expressions was that the monarchies essentially carried a holy right to exert dominion over all lands, waters, and our said heathens and our infidels who perhaps occupied those lands as they declared it, and how they interpreted heathens and our infidels were those that were declared to be unbaptized people. And so if any of the monarchies had come across any lands that were unoccupied or occupied as to what they deemed to be heathens and our infidels, they then carried a holy right to exert dominion and claim that land, territory, waters, and all the individuals who encompassed it under the crown that supposedly discovered that area. And so this came and rang true to be specific to 1492 with Cristobal Colon essentially landing on Honduras. And he claimed that land in the name of Spain, and Spain was utilizing one of the papal documents with regard to that, which, down the line, there's also other explorations that were brought forth by John Cabot in the establishment of the original colonies on the eastern portion of the United States. Nonetheless, when you get into the justification of asking yourself a simple question as to how these historical monarchies carried a right to exert discovery and show up to something that is new, that obviously is occupied, and there's peoples and nations who are living there. Anyway, how did they justify that? Well, unfortunately, it was through a holy, or what I would deem to be an unholy justification. And so there's a series of papal documents that existed throughout time, various years, but obviously the 1492 when it comes to the discussion of the native peoples of these lands, but it also affected peoples obviously in South America, in Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada currently. And so the framework when it comes to the justification of discovery is that of what I would deem to be a false religious pretense framework. The assertion or the original real will that was brought forth to exert a dominion over all lands, waters, and peoples. And so Fast forwarding into our specific territories, I think of a reference, and we're coming up on a 1-year anniversary on Monday to an announcement while I was still in the capacity of the Yakama Nation Council. We did an announcement last year on Indigenous Peoples Day, acknowledging and demanding the removal of the main stem dams, the Bonneville Dam, the Dalles Dam, and the JoDe Dam. And so when I think of Elliot's references and Jewell's references to the Snake River dams, something that happened in 1792 through the so-called discovery time periods, right? Is Captain Gray, on behalf of the United States, found his way after Spain and after a few others missed the mark, found his way to the mouth of Enchiwana. And Enchiwana is what everybody else knows and understands to be the Columbia River. And so when he made his way through the mouth and through the sandbars there, and he went upriver, and the next day they ran ashore, had to turn around and come back. And it was that next day after they ran ashore, and were going back to the mouth of the river, they stopped, and him and his first mate took a boat, a rowboat, and went to the north side of the Enchiwana, the north side of the Columbia River. And it's there that Captain Gray took out a few coins and dug a little hole underneath the pine tree. He put the coins in that hole, he covered it up, and he declared all that land and territory on behalf of the United States, in the same representation of that of the doctrine of Christian discovery. And so this was this original exertion and our will that was brought forth to exert dominion specific to Enchiwana, the Columbia River, and thereabouts all the other lands that now encompass what is deemed to be within the jurisdiction of the United States, are in Canada's respect, and are the other areas in our territories. And so history is history, and it's quite dark. But that was the original assertion specific to the territories that most of us who are on this call are within. Do society and do we understand to know that the original assertion of what has brought the history of the present moment when it comes to all that we see, encompass, and do began with an assertion of some coins buried under a pine tree? That's kind of weird, and it's kind of troubling as a Native person who's a descendant of the survivors of everything that has happened since 1792. But that's an important date, and another important date, I think, as far as some of the actions that are forming the practical context of the current discussion that is being expressed and are shared from all of us in one aspect or another, except that of the original pre-existence of our native nations and peoples. Another date would be 1823. 1823, the United States Supreme Court and its judicial branch formally adopted the doctrine of Christian discovery as part of U.S. case law. And it was in 1823 that Justice John Marshall, the Supreme Court Justice, adopted the doctrine of Christian discovery and utilized it as a justification in a falsified land dispute. But what it did was provided the original jurisdiction and justification that the United States adopted through the papal bulls, on through the royal charters, up to the existence and declaration of independence and the formation of the judicial branch in the United States, the ability to exert a false religious pretense as the justification to insert title or a declaration of title of the land in question or that was at dispute at that time. And that was on the East Coast of the United States. That's history, that's real, it's not made up. Anybody can go look up the case and read it and come to understand that, well, how did the United States utilize a 15th, 16th century papal bull in the lineage of all the interactions that happened from that as the justification to exert jurisdiction and establish title and our property? Because Johnson versus McIntosh is taught in law school in a general sense in Federal Indian Law 101, but for the most part, it's taught in property law because it's the origin of property law, but it's also the origin of federal Indian law. And so, that's an important thing that happened that's establishing context in the expressions of today. And then I would have to reference the 1855 period. 1855 was a time by which the United States had some would say negotiated, but I would say it was more of a dominating type of interaction specific to the treaty with Yakama Nation. and the other nations who were present in Perce and Uintila, and a number of other nations, I think, during those time periods had negotiated treaties. But one thing that was never expressed to our ancestral chiefs, our leaders who had negotiated to the best of their ability in spite of all the very ugly circumstances that were happening during that time period, is there was no justification, or there was no expression or a clause that was expressed by the United States to say, hey, the only reason that we have an ability to come and speak to you about treating with you and seizing jurisdiction and our title to your lands comes from a false religious pretense. And if and when the articles of which we both agreed upon here, which we deem to be the highest law of the land pursuant to Article 6, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, treaties are the highest law of the land. This was something that our people had understood, that the promises would be upheld, but something that has happened and is well documented. And as everybody knows, I think every treaty has been broken and then some. But the question is, how did they do it? How did they break the treaties? Well, they were broken before the ink was dried in most of them. But nonetheless, when you look at the historical record with regard to something when it comes to the reference of Article 3 of the Yakama Treaty, which is similar to that of the Nez Perce Treaty, is that we reserve an exclusive right to hunt and fish all of our exclusive areas and territories. And that was to be interpreted as from now until ever. But what does that mean when you put 4 dams in the Snake River, or you put 13 dams on the Enchuana, the Columbia River? Well, when you go back throughout time, the very simple question that's often within the hearts of us as Native people, especially those who have treaties that they look to historically as to be the embodiment of the law and are the authority that is going to protect the sustained existence of the resource and are the peoples, it becomes a challenge to say, well, why do our treaties and the promises continuously get broken, and what can be done about that? Well, when you look at the history, you fast forward to another time period, and I think I would want to reference 1886. And 1886, there was another Supreme Court case law. It's called U.S. versus Kagama. And the reason it's important is because it has a direct lineage citation trace to that of Johnson v. McIntosh, which is the original assertion of the false religious pretense to be that of the justification of all decisions going forward. But it also referenced an authority from the legislative branch of the United States that did not exist before. And that essentially, in a very simplest sense, is the result is what Congress says goes. And this is how the legislative branch of the United States has been able to break and renegotiate and make up new rules when it comes to the calling of tasks specific to the upholding of the articles of the treaties and all the various disputes and things that have happened since then. And so when Kagama came to be, it essentially provided the United States as an alternative avenue to create legislation or to create different pathways to either empower whatever entities it was, or agencies, or corporations, or whatever it is, essentially the ability to create legislation that bypasses the promises that were supposed to be upheld and memorialized within the articles of the treaty. And so it's an important time period. And I think another reference, fast forwarding to 1954, if anyone needs, some more current proof with regard to the position of the United States judicial branch and our other components that uphold this system of domination, as I'd like to reference it, is a case called U.S. versus Teton, and that was a case that entailed with regard to the justification of harvesting that timber and how the proceeds would be distributed. And in that brief in 1954, the United States went back and specifically cited the doctrine of Christian discovery, specifically cited Johnson versus McIntosh. And so we're going back to 1954, which isn't too long ago, but you can look to that brief as proof that the United States still operates under the current mechanism of this historical justification, which has that of a false religious pretense as the justification to continue to make what results in irresponsible decisions with severe consequences. I don't want to go too back into the historical perspectives because there's all kinds of time periods and references that can be brought forth. And if anybody wants a good look at them, reach out to Jewell James, because Jewell has created a very beautiful, significant timeline that references a lot of these things that I'm speaking of and more. But what it does is give somebody a roadmap to look at the practical actions that have happened throughout time, to be able to see what is framing the context of the present moment and all the policy, administrative, and the very practical, where the rubber hits the pavement kind of discussions. What is telling us what we can and cannot do when it comes to such things? But I'll fast forward to not too long ago, which was 2016. Yakama was able to attend a gathering that happened at Rome at the Vatican, and there was an audience that was established with Pope Francis and with the Pontifical Council on Justice and Peace. And that was a continuous effort, which there's been many historical efforts and interactions with the Vatican about the advocacy to have the Roman Catholic Church and in this case Pope Francis and in the Vatican rescind the unholy papal bulls that essentially are still operating today. And so there's a whole history to that, and I don't want to get into it because we would be here for a lot longer than whatever time I got left. But Yakama Nation at that time was able to hand deliver a resolution to Pope Francis and asking him to ceremoniously and to formally revoke the papal bulls in question, Inter Caetera and Dum Diversis. There's a few others that are relevant to the discussion. And we were also able to meet with the Council on Justice and Peace, which was made up of various archbishops. The Vatican's position at that time, and it somewhat hasn't changed, they dance around the issue very finely. And in the very simple sense, something that I had expressed to Archbishop Silvano Tomasi during that interaction was, look, I'm a Yakama, and if something had happened historically within our way of life that impacted society and other peoples and other races as significantly as has these historical papal bulls, because we're not messing around here. If we want to talk the truth, these papal bulls essentially are the written justification for the greatest genocidal acts in the known history of man. That's what we're talking about. And so the expression was, if that had existed and if there was something that came from the Yakama way of life, I, as a current leader, would do everything within my power to rescind ceremoniously, formally, and everything else to try to make things right. But the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church essentially took a position that those historical documents have no full force and effect in today's time, although they're very clever with regard to how things happen. And there's a lot of reasons that I think still goes on. But in 2016 that happened, and in 2019, there was a Supreme Court case, and that Supreme Court case many of you probably have heard of, the U.S. Department of Licensing for Washington State versus Cougar Den, and this was a Yakama case. And it was a licensing, it's a regulation case specific to travel and trade provisions within the treaty, but the case is very, very unique. It's very unique. And why is it unique? Because the Yakama Nation at that time was able to insert a brief into that case. And for the first time in the history, at least that I'm aware of, or that we were aware of at the time, the U.S. Supreme Court was challenged for the utilization of a lineage of case law that can be traced back to a false religious pretense as the justification to not honor the articles of our treaty. And so, the outcome of that case was that it turned out to be a win for the Yakama Nation, and very grateful for such. But nonetheless, the brief that Yakama had submitted was cited 3 times within the case, but not one of the Supreme Court justices, whether they were in the minority and or majority, touch the doctrine of Christian discovery arguments, of which there are some substantial arguments within the Yakama brief. So we know that they are aware of it, and we put them on notice. And I think that's something that exists and that's there. And I would encourage anybody to go read that brief because I think everybody that was involved did an excellent job with regard to trying to let the judicial branch of the United States know that you are on notice. And so when you look at the dams, when you look at the environmental discussions, when you look at the salmon discussion, when you look at the water discussion, when you look at the Salish Sea, when you look at the interactions between local jurisdiction, state jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction, the legislative acts that are supposedly supposed to be in place to protect all these things, the Environmental Protection Act, the NEPA process, the Clean Water Act, the interrelationships between the Corps of Engineers and the other agencies that are put in and put into task. And what you see in the manifestation of all the practical realities of how these agencies, the individuals within their roles and capacities function, is it's hiding in plain sight. No one looks at a representative from the Corps of Engineers and says, did you know where your authority comes from? Do you know the history of where your agency comes from? Do you know the history of what has manifested your current position to essentially put you in a position of decision making that may make or break the protection or the advocacy for a sustained resource, and or the insubstantially impact the well-being of not only the original and free nations of these of this territory, but people in general? And so I think when it comes down to what this organization has done, I seen and I read the resolution that was brought forth with regard to repudiating the doctrine of Christian discovery. But when you look at everything, when you look at the totality of what is and what isn't, and as I said, I try to pull my life experience as a young person to identify this system of domination and dehumanization, which, you know, I didn't come to know these things. I was blessed to have some interactions and my good friend and mentor when it comes to the doctrine of Christian discovery and its awareness and what it is, what it does, not only historically but currently, is a man named Stephen Newcomb, which many of you may know. He's done some substantial work throughout time with individuals like Jewell, with other individuals out there who are strong advocates and proponents of awareness to the doctrine of Christian discovery. But I think what is very critical is, you know, another individual who interacts with Steve and has had a 30-year discussion is a Professor Emeritus Peter Dorico from the East Coast there. And the nature and the manner by which you are discussing these issues is very veiled. Everything is it's nuanced and it's very detailed. And the average person in society doesn't know this history, let alone get into the details of how it functions and how it is framing that which is or that which isn't in a discussion about dams or a discussion about water or a discussion about jurisdiction. And then when you start looking at the entirety of the system and you have this lineage and this big old tree of Supreme Court case law, and you have this big old tree of supplemental legislation, legislative acts that have supported the different justifications and positions of what's formulating what Native nations, our Native peoples, our people in general from all races, creeds, and backgrounds can or cannot do about the Salish Sea, can or cannot do about the dams, about the salmon. Well, unfortunately, we look into this lineage of case law that surrounds water, and that lineage of case law is going to trace back to the origin of federal Indian law. And what is the origin of federal Indian law? The justification of a falsified religious pretense to say that's why the dams are going to have to stay. That's why the Salish Sea will continue to suffer. That's why your Nisuch, your Waikanish, your salmon will continue to suffer. And so how are we to look at all that and to see and bring that into us as individuals, as families, as communities, let alone as nations, and respectively, you know, nations, organizations coming forth collectively to say, what do you do about this? And I think that's the real question. Number one, awareness is very key, because nobody understands the detailed nature and the nuances that are involved with what continuously is formulating a system of domination, which it's about control, because it's not just legislation and case law. For my brother, Councilman Lane, and for Jewell, who is a former council person, and I think, I don't know, I think Deborah may have served, I'm not too sure, but for those who live within that realm and have served in that capacity, you know, when you look at the function of a Native nation, what you can or cannot do, what functions that, and you look at the financial picture of a Native nation, unfortunately for most, if not all Native nations, a large percentage of money that flows through from the function of a Native nation has an interaction or a component with that of the federal government or the state government. And unfortunately, you have to play by the rules of those who are, I guess you can say, making and establishing them. And those rules are within the fine print. So when you look at the current manifestations of that, of the social and human services, as Deborah had referenced, you know, sometimes our ways of life are substantially whatever better, but you look at the current capacities of social human services, of public safety, of education, of healthcare, of all these things. Every one of them has a body of case law, of legislation, of grants and contracts that have fine print that tell Native people this is what you can and cannot do to address the well-being of your people. All right. And so that entirety results in a systematic, oppressive domination system. And so we are limited to exert the free will acts as leaders, as people, as ones who care. The limitations of what is framing that practical context has all kind of historical reference and time points. Probably should stop there. And I appreciate the ability to share. If there's anything I want to say about this, I would hope that your organization hosts a 2-day or a 5-day or a week-long conference about the doctrine of Christian discovery, because that's what needs to happen. Because it's essentially that the core of every justified decision that's essentially framing the context of practical discussions today. You look at the landscape of the elections, of everything going on and all the issues that are out there. The doctrine of Christian discovery is turned. It's not just used in the implications of the dehumanization that's the result of today's time are not just Native people or the original and free nations who were here. It's also become all the other races. But there's one thing all the other races have in common. It's the poor people. This is what the doctrine of Christian discovery is now doing to society in general. And so, anyway, I better stop before I get myself really going. And so I appreciate the opportunity to share. And one thing I wanted to express before I get off is that for those who are bringing awareness about the doctrine of Christian discovery, those who are doing this work, trying to support it, I would hope that if there's one thing that you can do is those who are at the forefront from the Native side, encourage them. Don't be afraid to follow them, because those of us who are the current survivors of the consequences of it have been substantially impacted. And for us as Native people to heal with regard to the totality of all the negativity that's in the spectrum of our well-being currently, the only way that healing can come is that we address these issues as Native people ourselves, not follow somebody else and say, oh, they got the answers. And so, no, part of our healing is that we have to do it for ourselves as Native people, as individuals, as nations. And I would hope that, if you're going to try to support that you be mindful of such. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, JoDe. That was a lot of territory to cover, and I appreciate it. And just signals to us just how much we don't know and how much more we have to learn before we can really start tackling some of these issues. And hopefully we can do your 2 to 3 to 5 day conference on the doctrine of discovery. And I've seen that piece of work that Jewell has done. I mean, it's wall to wall on the historical legal history over U.S. Indigenous tribes, and it's overwhelming. Now, for the rest of the panelists, do you guys want to take a minute or so and kind of respond to each other about what was discussed, or should we go right into the Q&A?
Good, Deb. That sounds really good.
What's that?
Having that discussion amongst the panelists.
Yeah.
Decision. Who would have ever thought that Neil Gorsuch, a Trump appointee, would side? And we heard those beautiful words in that 5-4 decision in Oklahoma. I know you shared it with me, but that sends a statement to Indian country that the treaties are the supreme law of the land, and it's the United States government needs to uphold those promises. And so just a couple of thoughts from you on that decision that was made.
Well, Freddie, about 15 years ago, I used to run around with a piece of paper talking about the United States Constitution in Indian country. And I talked about the various parts of the Constitution that were being destroyed by Supreme Court decisions. And I talk about the cases that impact those provisions. So, I'd cite all kinds of parts of the Constitution: Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, Article 3, Section 2, Clause 1, and go on and on, Article 6, Clause 2. And I just kept making that speech and I would hold up a document that says U.S. Constitution, and I'd rip a piece off and throw it away. And people go, wow, I think I'm really into the argument or the presentation. And I just kept ripping that paper, throwing it away, ripping the paper, throwing it away. Just what they're doing in the Constitution, just ripping those words out, throwing them away like they have no meaning. And creating legal fictions to justify it. And like JoDe was saying, based on the discovery doctrine and Indian incompetency. The United States Supreme Court is ruling on the ability of the United States to do anything they want with Indian country. And so when I'd be done with my presentation, I'd hold up the paper that said the U.S. Constitution, and it was a swastika that was left by the time I was done tearing it up. And it was a warning saying that the neo-Nazis are coming. They're coming for you. What they're doing to Indian country is the step in the direction of what they're going to do to you other people. And so, when we look at the Yakama decision and the Oklahoma decision, and we think about, what's going on with the court? It's kind of interesting. Well, you got some conservatives being appointed to the Supreme Court, constitutionalists, constitutional construction. And they're looking at it and they're saying, the Constitution is supreme law of the land. In the Yakama case, the judge says, well, now the Washington State wants to come back in and negotiate the treaty that was established between the United States and the Yakama Nation. And the United States did not exist at that time. And so now they want to have their say in it. But the fact is that they're not going to renegotiate the treaty in this court. And so they upheld the treaty because, it is supreme law of the land. And I was really proud of the Yakama Nation. And I'm waiting forward, because I have been down. I don't even have a computer at home, so I don't know what the hell's going on out there. But, I try to look it up on my phone, smartphone, try to follow stuff I can. But I really want to know what our national warrior lawyers are saying. What are they saying about these conservatives and the nominee, and if they're going to see more and more conservative Supreme Court justices that are going to adhere to the canons of constructions of written constitutions, and then Indian country is in a much better situation than apparently of a liberal theologian or a liberal justice that may think they're doing something for us because we're the poor, helpless, defenseless Indian. When in reality, we're a sovereign nation and we negotiated as equals. One of the things that I would like to have people more aware of is that when the United States entered treaties with the Indian tribes, it was as equals. And sacred trust of civilization works like this. When it got better for the United States, it gets better for us. United States, us, United States, us. And so the standard of living is at par, and so as it improved for the people of the United States, it was supposed to improve for us as well. That's the sacred trust of civilization. That's where Oren Lyons talks about the two canoes going down the river side by side, and that's what it meant. But instead, we get lost and confused in this trust doctrine, the trust land argument. Well, the United States owns it for you because you're an incompetent Indian. You're an incompetent Indian nation. And so we're supposed to kiss up to the United States because they're controlling our land. And what they do, they made it so undivided that we can't even use it. People think, you Indians are lazy. You don't even use your land. That's because 1,000 of us own every acre. We got to have the majority of them to sign off if we want to put a home there, and everybody else wants to live on it too. So, I mean, they just messed up the ownership and made stuff up as they went by, and and the BIA, maybe they tried to do the best they could, but it wasn't good enough for Indian country, because in the end, the BIA was doing what was best for non-Indian country. And alienating the lands of the Indian people, giving it away for pennies on the dollar. When we look at things like Yakama Nation and their sovereign right to conduct commerce and sending products off reservation and bring it to the reservation, That was an awesome decision. And so, you know, when I look at the Treaty of Point Elliot, the only thing we agreed to do is not trade with Vancouver Island. You know, that's the only limit. You know, so then everything else is unlimited. You know, and that's why I was always upset when those BS cases came out in the 80s that limited our rights to bring something to the reservation where the state would intercept it. Interstate commerce is a sacred thing, but if it deals with Indians, oh, you got to look the other way, you know, and seize that product before the Indians get their hands on it, you know. And so they say, oh, those Indians will be selling their tax exemption. Well, so does New Jersey and Oregon and all the other states. You know, it's just a matter of finding a commercial balance of interest. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to happen. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the opinions of the more legally and politically astute tribal warrior lawyers that are national activists out there with an opinion worth following.
Any other comments, or Elliot, Deborah?
Thank you. And this is Elliot again, and just wanted to mention, kind of off track here, but a little bit, it's relative, I believe, that back here in Idaho, there was a recent archaeological site on the Salmon River of Nimiipuu, and it's called Cooper's Ferry, if anyone wants to Google it, Cooper's Ferry. And it showed that there was habitation there about 16,500 years ago. And that means that when there was a Lake Missoula and the last ice age, and you had these massive floods from the lake, that probably there were people that saw that happen. And seeing the waters coming down some of these canyons, that must have been something to experience. And so our people, and each one of the speakers who represent their people as leaders and activists, that's where they come from as well, their legacies and heritage. And we have to keep pointing this out, is that when I talk to my environmentalist friends and we start talking about sustainability, these folks, they come from communities that have sustained lifestyles for millennia, for thousands of years. And so they know what sustainability is. And so when you ask, well, how do we have a sustained economy that isn't natural resources extractive? I think that I would first ask Indigenous people about sustainability, but I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, thank you, Elliot. Deborah, do you want to throw something in there?
Yes, yes. I wanna thank my dear relatives from the tribal nations for the good words, and got me all excited about policy now. I kept it like policy, and then I want to hear more. I want that 3 to 5 to what did he say, a month of looking at where our policies have taken us, and you know where we can go from there. So I think that, you know, as we look at where we're going towards in this day and time, as we look at the heartbeat of our nation and who we are today, it is so important to remember our food sovereignty, our political justice, our own way of living in balance with this earth, with this environment. And I'm so grateful that the needs that our tribal people, that we look out for the needs of the river, because if we don't, who will? Corporations won't. They're looking out for the needs of their pocketbooks, and so we need that partnership. We need folks to stand with us as strongly as possible. Many of our young people are putting their lives on the line, and they're spending time in jail because they're fighting for things that we shouldn't have to fight for. It should be common sense that if we don't take care of our waters, that we won't have water to drink, that our fish will not survive, and And that's our ecosystem. That's our food sovereignty. That's how we feed our families. It's not just for Native American people, for Indigenous peoples of the lands. It's for everyone visiting these lands as well, those who have made these lands their homes. And so all of us, we're in this together. So this is such an important conversation that we need to have, and that we need to keep discussing and keep the truth and that honesty and that integrity, as my brother Jewell said. Speak with that heart and that compassion that we should have for one another and in our culture and our society. And definitely for me, it starts here at the heartbeat of my traditional homelands. My grandmother comes from here, and my grandfather and their fathers and mothers, and now my children. And now I'm here as a mother, preparing the salmon and canning. And during this political 2020 talk, folks are saying, how do we look at commerce? How do we provide for our families? Well, you feed your family. We need homes, we need shelter. So each person, that's just a part of humanity. And I think there's some great folks out there talking about that. It's just amazing how many aren't listening, that you can have a better life if you take care of, not only take care of yourself and your family, but we're part of a society. And so if we take care of the society, then we're stronger, much stronger together. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. Freddie, did you
I'm-
have a question?
I'm speechless. I guess the one thing that I'd like to, June 2nd, 1924, 96 years ago, American Indians were granted United States citizenship. The Snyder Act, signed by President Coolidge. But I just want to let everybody know that Seattle Times came up and they're doing a story on the efforts that we're doing here at in Clackamas territory, here at Lummi Reservation, and that's organizing the Native vote. And so I just really want to encourage, Jewell and I talk about this a lot. A lot of our Indian tribes weren't even able to vote until the 50s. A lot of our American Indian people served in World War I, and we weren't even citizens. And so, really recognizing to everybody that's listening, campaigns, we're being real aggressive here at Lummi Nation. We're organizing 10/20/2020. It's a Tuesday, October 20th. We're trying to get Native American tribes in Washington State to get out the vote. Indian organizations, the Spokane American Indian Center signed on today. Fawn Sharp, the Quinault. I'm reaching out to Yakama and all those that can participate to really get out the vote. This is the vote of our lifetime. And the background picture is our brand, our logo. And that's Edward Curtis's picture of a Lummi woman. And so just really can encourage that. I know you're probably right on your time frame, Deb. That's a great job. But I just wanted to share that and thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, JoDe. Thank you, Jewell. Thank you, Elliot. We're all a part of the human race. We're all Americans, and we're all going to get through this together. And I just couldn't wish the best to each and every one of you, your families, your communities, and everybody that's participating. And thank you, Deb, and all those that made tonight possible. My heart just feels that much more full, and some things are written on my heart that I will carry for the rest of the days of my life here. So ACM, thank you, Deb.
Thank you to all of you. Well, then I think we'll wind it up. And again, whoops, what?
Right, real quick, Deb.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, so I just want to express my appreciation to the other panelists and to the words that have come out, and really thank everybody for the ability to share. And then I don't want to, end it on a negative note, but it's tough not to get into some of the consequences that have happened throughout time with regard to some of the things that were referenced and expressed and that are currently manifesting, as I always like to remind everybody, the context of the present discussion. The election, I understand everybody's, I understand the advocacy, and I mean no disrespect, because I definitely appreciate the good work that's being done, as my brother Freddie had referenced and all that. But I just wish that the Native Vote campaign obviously is gained a lot of momentum and done a lot of positive things throughout time, and it's going to continue to grow because you have people like Freddie and you have people, other strong advocates out there who are pushing that advocacy. I just wish the same type of advocacy would come for awareness to the doctrine of Christian discovery. Because if we had enough Native people that truly were aware of these things, the kind of awareness that you need to understand that which is and that which isn't, and then getting into why. I mean, the fortunate and harsh reality that I observe is oftentimes we're discussing and pursuing issues, and to the best of our ability, we're trying to identify solutions in a practical sense to address those. But nonetheless, we have not a clear understanding of where the origin of the will is coming from and how it truly is forming the present context of these discussions, whatever issue it may be. It's any issue, much as Jewell had referenced. That was a commerce case, the Cougar Den case. Everyone probably knows and is aware of the McGirt v. Oklahoma case that happened. A ruling came out a few months ago in July. Well, that was a jurisdictional case, a criminal jurisdiction case. But if you look at the lineage of case law that was being cited by not only the state of Oklahoma and the United States, the reality is that that lineage of case law and legislation that supplemented that case law can all be traced back to the origin of federal Indian law, Johnson v. McIntosh. And so what you have is an exertion with regard to a component in practical reality, perhaps would be a jurisdictional kind of case, but it deals in the realm of public safety, of human services, social services. That's the encompassing modern day issue by which a judicial precedent was set. And everybody says, oh, this is the greatest case ever. And it's great that the Supreme Court didn't terminate the nation. That's great. That is a win. But nonetheless, that's what it would have meant if they lost. And so anyway, I just want to say to everyone that these historical documents and time periods that I referenced, it's not like they don't have any full force and effect in today's time. If you do your due diligence and you peel back the layers of these current issues, you'll come to find that all of them can be traced back to this origin. And until we deal with that origin, we're going to continue to spin our wheels. And so I just wanted to share that and say thank you once again for the opportunity, and say thank you to Deb and to all the other organizers and those who are behind the scenes doing the technical work. I appreciate that kind of stuff because I'm into that kind of stuff as well within our site. And to my fellow panelists, thank you for all your beautiful work that you guys have done. It's an honor to be on this panel with you guys. And I really wish you all well, each and every one, and safety to all as well in this challenging time.
Thank you, JoDe.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Good night now.
Good night, Elliot. Thank you.
Signing off.
Yeah, good night. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Jewell. Thank you. JoDe, good night. Thank you. Deborah, good night and thank you. Freddie, good night. Thank you. Thank you, Sahar, Larkin, Christine, and thank you to everybody else who stayed with us. We appreciate it. Good night.